discuss about the content eNodeB device data part 3. So let's look into how to add an RRU chain. So before an RRU chain is added, the baseband board specified by the head cabinet number, head subrack number and head slot number must be configured. So we have the chain number here. We have the topo. Usually it will be either chain, ring and load balance, but in this case we will use chain. We have the backup mode. So the backup mode is usually cold backup because we need to have a shorter reset time. So basically it will choose a cold backup. Head slot number is referring to the LBBP slot number or UBBP slot number, and head port number is the port number from the LBBP or UBBP board. So they will be the main connection towards your RRU board later. So these are some of the important points that has to be configured. So let's look into number of RRU chain that they have configured in our lab. So I'm going to list RRU chain. So over here I have one chain that has configured to my LBBP board. So this is chain number 0, chain cool backup. So head port cabinet subrack is the same as before. Slot number 3, port number 0. So these are the information. Next, we're going to add an RFU. So RFU, usually the command is add RRU. So cabinet number 0, usually the subrack is based on the subrack, whether you are using RFU subrack. RFU subrack is 4. So you have to refer back to the subrack. Like earlier I mentioned, we have two subrack, one for BBU, one for RFU. So this one will be related to the RFU subrack. Then we have the slot number 0. Chain number will be the earlier one that we have configured 0. Position is always 0. We need to define the RRU type, LRFU. This is a LTFTD mode and number of TX and RX channel. So let's look into our example. So I'm going to list the RRU. So I have one RRU here. So basically they have some additional information. We are just going to look into the main part. So this is 060. So this one is MRRU. Alright. This is MRRU. So when you list the RRU, you see MRRU here for this particular site. There is LTFTD and 2x2 over here. So when I display the RRU, I can check whether this RRU is working or not, whether it's down or whether it's up. So I can see there is an excess from chain and ring. So that means it's up, right? Next is the RRU. So RRU, usually the only difference is the subrack number. So the subrack number we start from 60 onwards and it is independent. It doesn't have any cabinet. It is independent and usually configured on a tower or a pole. So basically it doesn't have a cabinet. So cabinet we correspond to the just a standard cabinet 0. Subrack is 60 onwards, slot number 0. Usually position is trunk. Chain number we follow back the earlier one 0. Position is 0. The RRU type is MRRU. Working unit is LTFTD. Then we have to define the TX and RX channel. So later on, we have to configure time and clock. So this is also part of device data. So we have to configure time data. So we have to set the time zone. And if you are from the daylight saving zone, you have to set the daylight saving time also. Add the time source. And if you're using NTP client, the network time protocol, then you have to use that and set the master NTPS. And for the synchronization data, we have to define what kind of clock system you're using. If you're using GNS clock system, then you have to configure the GNSS clock. If you're using IEEE or IP clock server, you have to configure based on the IP clock server command. And if you're using Ethernet clock, you have to follow the Ethernet clock system. So it depends on what kind of external clock system you are using. You just have to configure that. You don't have to configure everything from here. It depends on what external clock source you are using. So let's look into set the time zone and daylight saving. This is a high risk command. So usually we will set the time zone based on the country time. So over here is an example, and they also have the daylight saving where you need to define the start month, end month, and also the start time and end time over here. So let's look into an example of the time zone. So I'm going to list the time zone here. So let's look into the time zone for this particular site. They are using GMT +8 and there is no daylight saving. So next we're going to add the time source. If the time source is set to NTP, maximum 4 NTP clients can be used. And you also need to add NTPC and set the master NTPS command to master the NTP client. So there are 3 commands related here. Set time source, add NTPC, and set master NTPS. You have to define the server information. So let's check one by one. So we're going to check the time source. We're going to view the time source first. So because we need to know whether you're using NTP client or not first. So I'm going to view the time source. So in this case, they are using NTP. So since you are using NTP and the switch is on, there will be an NTPC information. So I'm going to list the NTPC information here. So, but over here, there is no configured information about NTPC. That means there is no NTP client, even though you have defined that you're using a NTP client. So Q&A session, if the time source is set to NTP, a maximum of 8 NTP clients in the standby state by default can be added by running the add NTPC command. Is this statement yes or no? This is a wrong statement. So the summary of this section, eNodeB device data, we have covered about add an RRU chain, add an RRU. We have also discussed about time and clock configuration commands. We have discussed about how to set the time zone and DST in a high risk command. And the last but not least, we discussed about set the time source. That's all from me. Hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you. Bye.